At 3 years old, you asked about 100 questions every single day. By the time you turned 11, you'd pretty much stopped asking questions altogether. And here's the part that should terrify you. By 25, only 2% of people can still think outside the box. That means 98% of us lost something between childhood and adulthood, something we desperately need back. But what if I told you the problem isn't that we stopped being curious? What if the real question, the one literally nobody is asking, is why we stopped asking questions in the first place? And more importantly, what happens when we start again?
Let me paint you a picture. There's a meeting happening right now in some office. A junior designer sits quietly in the corner while the product manager presents a 30-slide deck about redesigning an existing feature that nobody uses. The team nods along. Everyone's thinking the same thing, but nobody says it. Finally, the junior designer raises her hand. Wait, do we know if the feature is actually broken or if people just can't find it? The room goes silent because nobody thought to ask that question. The manager had spent weeks on this presentation. The VP was waiting for progress. The team had already accepted that the feature was outdated. But this one obvious question, the one that could save them months of wasted effort, came from the newest person in the room. Research from Stanford shows this happens constantly. The most experienced people in any discussion skip right past basic questions because they assume everyone already knows the answers. They call it the paradox of expertise. And here's the twisted part. The people most comfortable asking dumb questions are usually senior leaders, specifically white males, who have enough social capital to protect themselves if they're wrong. Everyone else just stays quiet. A 2024 study published in the Journal of Experimental Child Psychology discovered something fascinating about when children learn to stop asking questions. It's not because they lose curiosity, it's because between ages 8 and 10, they start understanding social context. They learn when it's appropriate to interrupt adults. Children with highly authoritarian parents ask significantly fewer questions than children raised in more open environments. In other words, we don't lose curiosity, we learn to suppress it.
So what happens to all those questions we swallow? UCLA researchers tracked curiosity across the adult lifespan, testing over 1,200 people between ages 20 and 84. They found something nobody expected. General curiosity, what scientists call trait curiosity, does decline with age. But a different kind of curiosity, called state curiosity, actually increases dramatically after middle age and keeps climbing into old age. Think about it like this. When you're younger, you need curiosity for everything. Learning skills, building a career, paying a mortgage, raising kids. You're curious about 1,000 things because you have to be. But as you accumulate knowledge and experience, you stop needing that scattered curiosity. Instead, you become intensely curious about specific things that actually matter to you. The problem is the gap between these two kinds of curiosity. From your 20s through your 40s, you're so focused on survival that you stop asking the deeper questions. You stop challenging assumptions. You accept things as they are because questioning them feels like a luxury you can't afford. And that silence, that learned suppression of curiosity, might be killing your brain. Not metaphorically, literally. A study published in PLOS One found that older adults with higher levels of curiosity live significantly longer. Why? Because curiosity improves your ability to adapt to challenges, limited mobility, changing living arrangements, health problems. Curious people develop better coping skills, form new friendships more easily, and find creative solutions to problems. The researchers concluded that exploratory problem-solving behavior is fundamental to living longer. When you stop asking questions, you stop adapting. When you stop adapting, you start declining. It's that simple and that brutal. Now here's where this gets personal. Relationship experts ran a series of experiments, including speed dating scenarios, to test one simple thing: what makes people like you? They tested charisma, humor, physical attractiveness, shared interests, but one factor outperformed everything else by a massive margin. People who asked more questions, especially follow-up questions, were consistently rated as more likable. Not coincidentally, not sometimes, every single time. The researchers published their findings in 2017, and their conclusion was stark. When you ask follow-up questions, you signal genuine interest. You show that you're actually listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk. And people respond to that on a visceral level. One researcher put it perfectly: nobody ever says, "You're just too interested in me." But we've trained ourselves to do the opposite. We meet someone, ask one polite question, then immediately pivot to talking about ourselves. We think that's how you make a connection, by being interesting. But the data shows the exact reverse is true. You become interesting by being interested. Charles Duhigg documented this in his book, Supercommunicators. He found that in conversations where one person asks continuous follow-up questions, the other person will often talk for minutes without ever reciprocating, and they'll walk away thinking it was the best conversation they've had in months. The person who did all the talking will say the person who barely spoke was fascinating. That's the power of questions. They don't just gather information, they build trust, create connection, and make people feel valued in a way that almost nothing else does.
So here's the question nobody's asking. If questions are this powerful, why aren't we teaching people how to ask them? We spend years teaching children to memorize answers. We test them on what they know, not on what they wonder. By age 8, kids transition from learning to read to reading to learn, and educators report that students immediately lose interest. They feel burned out before they hit middle school. Not because learning is boring, but because we've stripped away the one thing that made it exciting: the freedom to ask why. Studies on aging and question asking show that older adults ask significantly fewer original questions than younger adults. It's not because their curiosity died. It's because they spent 60 years in systems that rewarded answers over questions. They literally forgot how to ask. But the research also shows something hopeful. When older adults do maintain their curiosity, when they keep asking questions, learning new skills, taking up new hobbies, their cognitive decline slows dramatically. Some researchers are now exploring whether curiosity should be treated as a preventative measure against dementia, like exercise for your brain. The question isn't whether curiosity matters. The question is whether we're willing to do the uncomfortable work of asking more questions, even when we think we already know the answers.
That 3-year-old version of you who asked 100 questions a day wasn't annoying. That kid was on to something. They understood what we've forgotten, that every answer is just a doorway to more questions. That curiosity isn't childish, it's fundamental to being human. So here's my question for you, the one nobody asked but everyone needs. When did you stop asking questions? And more importantly, what would happen if you started again?